patrons and carnies. I am Creepy Clown Girl, the owner of this Carnival of Horror. Please, let me direct you to the big dark tent at the end of the midway. It contains all of my favorite masked narrators. Their stories are so scary that if they took off their mask, you wouldn't survive.
What do you think of when you hear the word solitary confinement? Do you think of darkness? Do you think of isolation? Do you think of loneliness? Honestly, it's all those things. I've been in solitary confinement for a while now. I can't really give you an exact number. I stopped counting the days in my head when I realized that the amount of time passing made no difference. I wouldn't be getting out of here anytime soon, so keeping track of time wouldn't benefit me. How does it feel here? What's it like? I'll tell you. It's lonely. It took me a few days before I realized just how lonely this feels. There was a time when I didn't crave human interaction. I despised people. I couldn't stand to look at them, be near them, or smell them. I couldn't tolerate the sounds of their voices, their mannerisms, or their faces. It felt like a sensory overload just being out in public among them. I'd get these blinding headaches after being around them for only a few minutes. It's the reason I've only ever held night jobs with busy work and limited human interactions. It's also the reason I started drinking heavily and popping large doses of aspirin after every single public outing I had to make, like when buying food or clothing. I think the constant temperature here was what started getting to me next. You've probably felt cold at night at some point and wrapped yourself up in a blanket to get warm. Or maybe you felt hot and sticky on a summer evening, and you had to throw the blankets on the floor just to let your skin cool down. For you, it's an inconvenience or a simple annoyance. But I'd give anything to feel cold or hot. I've never felt either since I've been here. I've felt neither hotness nor coldness. Yes, solitary confinement is also dark. Completely opaque. It's the most noticeable aspect of being here like this, and it's also the most unnerving. The longer you sit in the darkness, the more your other senses try to compensate for the lack of stimuli. Do you hear that clock in the background? Has it gotten louder to you since I started this story? Were you closing your eyes just now to experience the darkness with me? I can feel the vibrations in my brain every time that clock ticks. It's the only stimulation I have here, but I'd give anything for it to stop right now. So how did I get here inside the cell? I murdered someone. That's right. I took a life. She was a 16-year-old girl with a brand new car. I hear she was beautiful. I didn't even get to see her that way, though. I had been drinking heavily again when I made the extremely poor decision to drive to the convenience store for more aspirin to quell yet another headache. I didn't even see the red light. All that registered into my drunken mind was the impact. The broken glass. The strawberry blonde hair attached to the mangled head poking through the broken windshield, and the shimmer of red liquid cascading down the hood of her car. I drifted in and out of consciousness as the EMTs arrived and tried to stabilize me. I still remember the voices of her parents as they screamed in emotional agony over the loss of their daughter. Her name was Emma. That's a pretty name. I never got to tell them I'm sorry, but sorry would never bring her back. So here I am. What do you think of when you hear the word solitary confinement? Do you think of darkness? Do you think of isolation? Do you think of loneliness? Honestly, it's all those things. Solitary confinement can even be your own body. Can you still hear the clock? It sounds different today. I just want it to stop.
Good evening to listeners of all sorts. You are tuning into Are You Afraid of the Art? My story will not be a story for my conscious mind, but will be one of the many mares from the subconscious depths of my subconscious mind that formed during my early youth. It's strange. This room is familiar, and I know it's visually my bedroom, but it isn't. Everything is in the same place as I know of, but it's dimly lit, and the corners are as dark as an abyss. It embodies a surreal, lingering aura of dread. An indescribable sound is heard faintly coming from down the hall, and a smell of musty mothballs to accompany it. I got out of bed to venture out of curiosity. Plopping my feet onto the cold, worn, wooden floor and walking down the hall. The sound of what now sounded like chanting and humming was present. It is foggy. A black kind of fog that the eyes can't possibly register as a color or pigment, but as a visual void. Only candles on the walls dimly lit the way. Out of nowhere, appearing from the fog, the silhouette of a man stands ahead of me, that of which I have never seen with my eyes before, but was familiar with his presence. He appears tall but formless in the features that would normally have a face and a head shape. He points and guides me down the hallway to the living room. As I approach it, the fog reveals the back of the couch with my parents sitting facing the TV. I can only see the back of their shoulders, heads, and the back of the couch as they were watching a gray screen of noise on TV while cigarette smoke was slowly rising to the ceiling from the table in front of them. They didn't budge or react to me when I said anything to them or introduced them to my friend. They were irresponsive and stood completely still, and I could feel them being emotionless and began to get the feeling that it wasn't them. A loud, low-pitched of a sinister laugh is heard behind me. I turned my head to look, and the figure that just guided me here had vanished. I turned my head back toward the couch, and it was empty. The static on the TV suddenly got louder, as the faint light I could see through the fog from the candles started getting dimmer. Suddenly, I am back in my bed, but before I even wonder how or why, I hear the piano in the living room playing, so I get up to see who is playing piano in the middle of the night as everyone slept. Walking to the hall again, on the creaky wood floors in the near full darkness. The only light that paved the way is the one dim lamp over the piano. I enter the room and it is my brother playing the piano. It looks like my brother, but I know it isn't him. He was just far enough where I can't see the features on his face. I begin to say, "Why are you up playing this late?" The light immediately goes out, and it is pitch black in the room for a moment. And in the very moment, a deep-pitched, loud laughter echoed. The light comes back on, and he disappeared, and no one else is in sight. It became dead silent. The feeling of being suddenly watched and approached by unseen forces became inevitable. Moving quicker and quicker, I drag my sock-wearing feet toward the kitchen in the next room, and it is brightly lit with the TV on, again with cigarette smoke rising from the kitchen table to the ceiling. My grandparents occupy the chairs watching the TV. They appear stiff as mannequins, and they don't even look like they're breathing, but appear fine at a glance. I also need to check on the animals to make sure that they are okay now, that I know that my grandparents are being harassed by this force. Rushing into the bedrooms, finding one of our cats, I kneel down to pet her. After my hand contacts and pets her head, her body collapses silently and her limbs disembark from her body and fall to the floor, cleanly, without blood or anything from within. This disturbs, shocks, and put me into a state of panic. So my reaction was to run and tell my grandparents. This time, just my grandmother was in there. I told her what had happened to one of the cats, and she didn't react. At first. A moment later, after I had just explained, she released a soft but low-pitched, ominous snicker. Since there was no help given there, I ran to find my grandpa. So I'm going back through the hallway I came from, but it's changed this time. The walls and floor are bathroom tiled but gritty, broken, and stained with blood in areas. It looked like it was there for decades before my short existence. Rusty shower heads were lined up and hung up high, all uniform across the walls. I felt a presence appear from behind me, and it was the formless man again. He pushes me down the hallway but doesn't physically touch me. The now newly elongated hallway into one of the bedrooms. He's standing behind me. I turn the corner, only to see about 100 candles lit, all over the shelves and dressers in the room, and the grisly sight of my grandparents, attending and standing next to a recently then dead loved one, sitting in what they said was his favorite recliner, his body upright with strings attached to his limbs and hung from a pulley on the ceiling. Also, while donning a forced, soulless, lifeless smile, his eyes staring directly towards me. They said they kept him this way so he'll always be with us and be happy. They all, in one motion, in unison, stood in a line, all facing me, stared and waved simultaneously. The figure disappeared, and the candles went out. The room became the basement stairs. Behind me only appeared a wall, so I had no choice but to go down the stairs. It was dark, but was lit by 2 light bulbs in the ceiling. As I reached the bottom of the stairs, the figure tasked me with finding, retrieving, then returning a book that I supposed the figure needed. I was now given 30 seconds to find this book, or else. I looked immensely, all while it's silent, with the only thing I hear and feel is a pulsing heartbeat in my ear and a pounding out of my chest, making me tense to find this book. Walking around, circling the basement, feels like slow motion because of the fear that had been bestowed. There are stacks of random things upon stacks of other random things, including many books that bore resemblance to one another. My 30 seconds was almost up, with no book to offer the figure, when suddenly, everything stopped. It became dead silent, and could no longer hear or feel the heartbeat pounding in my ear and out of my chest, but only the ringing in my ear of the dead silence. The lights dimmed, but also turned red. A new beam of light appears from up the staircase. I look, and there's a wide open door for my exit. I see the stairs and run to them, but I hear the door at the top slam and hear it lock loudly. Jumping onto and up the first 2 steps, the steps cascaded and fell onto the ground, completely broken with no other way up. Me falling onto the ground painfully, I get up. Looking around in the dead silence, there is a short, shapeless, void-colored figure facing me and slowly flopping one limb in front of the other towards my direction. It is slow and silent, but it is after me. I backpedal closer towards the wall and near the utility sink and shelves. My time is up. I suppose they sent this after me. I had nowhere else to go, so I stood. The shape was about 6 feet from me. Quickly, within a matter of 2 seconds, a long, skinny, seemingly endless black, skinless pair of arms stretched out from under a chest that was 3 inches from the ground and reached for my ankles. It grasped them with its sharp and cold claws, tugged me off my feet as I hit the hard concrete, and yanked my whole body inhumanly fast under the chest, concluding this mare.
I'm 26 years old, blonde hair and blue eyes, 5'6", so pretty typical, really. This seems really pointless now, but I promise it is important information though. It will mean a lot later in this message. It's hard to decide where to start, so I will just run you through from the beginning, I suppose. 2 weeks ago, I was out for a run before work, and before the road got hectic with the heavy morning work traffic. There was a fog. I remember this distinctly because it was so thick that it actually made it hard to see about 10 feet in front of me. Before I knew it, a dark red SUV started to become visible through the heavy clouds. I don't know what happened here really, as it was all so fast. 1 minute, I was running my normal route. The next, I was grabbed and thrown into the SUV. I guess they used chloroform or something like it to knock me out, because when I came to, I was in a solid white room with absolutely nothing in it but me. I don't know what was worse, realizing that I had been kidnapped, or the maddening essence of the dead and empty room that I was being kept in. For 2 days, I saw and heard no one, minus the terrified screams, pleas, and downright pitiful begging that escaped my mouth. Finally, they came, but it was no blessing. I was taken to another white room, with actual stuff in it, stripped down to nothing and washed like a dog, cold water and all. There was 3 men and 1 woman in the room. The woman just sat back and observed, every now and again writing something down. The men heckled me, tossed me around between them. They touched me, but blessedly, the woman spoke up before it went any further. She had a very thick German accent. I remember she said for them to wait until it was my turn, that they didn't want to spoil anything. I was taken to yet another solid white room, but this one wasn't empty. There was a chair in the center, screwed into the floor, an empty box, about the size of a coffee pot box, and a metal swivel table covered with white cloth. Here I was plopped into the chair, my ankles and wrists tightly bound with heavy metal latches. I was terrified. I asked them what they were going to do with me, but no one spoke a word as they went about their tasks. I felt like an object to them, not a human, just like them. Everyone left, and once again, I was alone. A whirring noise brought me out of the panic attack I was beginning to go into. I watched in horror as an extra-large TV descended from above me and settled in against the wall directly in front of me. A man dressed like an old butcher from the 50s and a woman dressed like an old-fashioned nurse came in and uncovered the metal table, revealing a plethora of small tools, a scalpel, several other types of med-surg equipment, dental tools, and other things I didn't really recognize. I have never been so terrified in my entire life. My hell truly began when the screen lit up, and a small group of people came up in their own chat bubbles. The butcher asked the nurse if everything was in order. She nodded and said in a German accent, "Yes, doctor. Everyone has paid." He smiled and thanked the group of 6 on the screen. My body trembled beyond my control. "Very well then, let's begin," the butcher commented. The nurse walked over to the screen and turned up the volume. "What is your first request?" she asked the panel. The first person in line on screen said, "Bite her nipple. Hard. Then peel it off, nice and slow." This is where I began screaming. They began attempting to put a ball gag in my mouth, but the man on the screen stated, "Let her scream." The nurse walked behind me, grabbing my chest hard and sticking them out as far as she could. The butcher then leaned down and bit the right one. White hot pain seared through my body. Just as the man wanted, I screamed. The nurse, which I heard the butcher call Olga, brought a long, thin pair of straggly-shaped tongs and a scalpel. The butcher took the scalpel, leaving the nurse with the tongs. She grabbed my nipple and pulled it out as far as she could. So far I thought she might rip it off. Then the butcher stepped forward and began to slice through the tender skin of my chest. I screamed and screamed, but my captors didn't even react. I tried struggling, but it only made things worse. In a matter of just a few minutes, as the butcher took his sweet time, I was left with no nipple. I could feel warm blood leaking down my stomach and pooling underneath me. The nurse and the butcher looked expectantly at the screen, awaiting their next order. I stole a glance at the man currently commanding my torture. He was just a normal guy. They all were. Out of the 6 men, only one looked slightly uncomfortable. They wore suits and ties and looked like professionals, each appearing to have just stepped out of the office. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I'm not sure what I expected, but it wasn't suit and tie wearing office pros. My heart sank. If these guys were capable of this, then anybody was. Struggling against my restraints, determined not to suffer any longer, I cried out and cursed the man behind the damn television screen. I cursed the butcher and the nurse. I continued my tirade until I heard one of the men say, "Undo her and beat her against the walls." I looked up in shock. Was there an end to their cruelty? Quickly, the nurse moved the cart of horror toys out of the room and returned to my side. Together, they removed my shackles and I was free. I bolted for the door, but was yanked backwards by my hair. Again, I screamed in pain, which seemed to please everyone but myself. Before I could even fall, the butcher swung me around, still holding me by my hair, and slammed me into the wall opposite of the door. I hit it hard enough to knock the wind out of my lungs. Again, before I was even able to think of what to do, I was slammed into another wall, then another, and another, until the man with the request said it was enough for him. The butcher grabbed me by my upper arm and forced me in front of the screen. I have never felt so exposed, so vulnerable, so small in all my life. I prayed that they were done. The nurse stepped forward then and said, "You have 7 more minutes of paid time. What is your final wish for a little beauty here?" She gestured at me. There was a silence for the moment, as the men seemed to be deciding on what they wanted to do for the finale, but the request was nothing I had braced for. Torture her. I was floored. I begged and pleaded that they change their minds, to the butcher to please not, to the nurse as a woman to please stop this. But my words fell on deaf ears, and the butcher seemed determined to oblige. As I heard the sound of his leather apron hit the floor and belt come undone, he still held me by my arm. I struggled with all my might to get away, but I was jarred with the hulk of a man turned and backhanded me right across my face. I nearly fell, and he used this to his advantage, throwing me the rest of the way to the ground, positioning me so that the men could see everything from a sideways view. "Make it rough," one of the men called. The butcher crawled over top of me and smiled. "With pleasure," he stated, wrapping one large, beefy hand around my throat and pushing down. By the time he was finished with me, my screams had diminished to pathetic-sounding sniffles and begging. I just wanted this torture over with. I wanted them to kill me. And this was the moment that he would. Sure, that would be the men's last request. I was shocked to hear them say to keep me alive for another time, and they'd likely be back. The man lifted me off the ground, licked my ear and whispered, "Looks like it's your lucky night, hi sweetheart." I was far too exhausted from the pain and shamed to fight back. I just let them take me, praying that they would end the torture. Unfortunately, I was immediately shoved back into my little white room and left there until they decided that if I put this information on the normal internet, it would bring in more customers. Please stop watching these videos. Please stop visiting the dark web. This isn't a joke. It's people's lives, and they shouldn't be destroyed, tortured, or killed for the amusement of others. But maybe I can save someone else from this fate. Maybe you.
I love watching YouTube. There are so many talented people uploading content every day. Vloggers, gamers, narrators, even history channels. They're all so fascinating to me. There's one, though, that stands out above the rest. James No Skin. You know the channel. Everybody knows his channel. He does a little bit of everything, but specializes in horror. Horror stories, horror films, heck, even horror playthroughs. If he was offered a deal in Hollywood, there is no doubt that he could single-handedly save the quickly declining horror genre with his fresh ideas and terrifying, funny humor. He is the type that would have you nervously laughing, half wondering if he was serious or joking about skinning his neighbor alive. I think that given the chance, me and James could be best friends. I would love to be in one of his videos, and have told him so a number of times in the comment sections. This magical portal is my true window into his world. His videos are fantastic, but in the comment section is where his true personality shines. His interaction with his fans shows who he truly is. There are, however, those people. Those that are blinded by his greatness. Most of these can be taken care of by me and his millions of other fans. When they start to fight him, we finish it. James says he doesn't want us to, though we know he's just being nice. He always sees the best in people, and doesn't know how evil or stupid they really are. He has even gone so far as to ban a few of us for standing up for him. But I know he didn't mean it. He does, however, have to be careful that his comment section doesn't get him in trouble with the big wigs over at YouTube headquarters. If I ever got his channel shut down, I would just die. So, I've come up with a better way. Being banned was a bummer, but it's the great thing about the internet. When one account gets banned, you can always open another. I knew James knew this when he banned me. He is so smart. He knew I would be back. This new account I don't want to get banned though, which brings me to where we are now. The other day, while reading through posts on Twitter, something caught my eye. A post by a little nobody YouTuber talking about how James should not post horror content anymore, as horror is dead and would never come back. I couldn't believe my eyes. How dare this upstart insult the greatness that is James? As I read, I saw that James replied back to him, telling him that he is primarily a horror channel and will continue to produce what he enjoys, and that if this little prick didn't like it, he didn't have to watch. It was, of course, full of hundreds of comments from James's other fans. I know better, though. I know I am the perfect fan. I know that replying back isn't enough for these self-righteous heretics. No. That is why I am here. With you. Sorry. What were you saying? I can't hear that hateful speech or screams. It seems that your mouth has been sewn shut. Look at this video. How could you not love this? You are probably wondering just what I am going to do with you, huh? Well, don't worry your pretty little head. I just wanted to make sure you never speak bad about him again. That's why I removed those hateful little digits of yours. The same ones that type out all those hateful words about my friend. You should really be careful about who you insult online. Even the nicest people that you think would never hurt you may have a guardian angel watching out for them. Aw, you seem to be blacking out. I guess I could have bandaged you up to stop all that liquid hate from draining out of you, but Too little too late, right? Don't worry about your fans, though. I have already used your computer to make one last tweet. I let them know that you are very, very sorry about what you said about James, and that you have decided to shut down your channel, social media, and focus on a more productive career. Nobody will miss you.
Bunny Man Bridge. Back in 1903, deep in Clifton, there used to be an asylum buried deep within the wilderness of Clifton. Pretty soon after the Civil War, people started inhabiting the area, population-wise around 300 or so. It was a very small town. Nonetheless, people didn't like the idea of having an asylum miles down the road, so they all got together and signed a petition for the asylum to relocate elsewhere. The petition passed and a new asylum was built, which is now known as Lorton Prison, a temporary facility for convicts to stay in until they are appropriately sentenced. In the autumn of 1904, the convicts were gathered and piled into the bus used to transport them to Lorton. Somewhere during the drive not too far from where they left, the driver had swerved to avoid something, and the bus started to tip, and was soon rolling in a terrible collision course. Most of the convicts were injured, but managed to escape the bus and had fled into the night towards the woods. The next morning a local police investigation had begun, and they began rounding up the escaped convicts. Hours turned into days, into weeks. Weeks into months. Everyone was recovered after 4 months except two of the people named Marcus A. Walster and Douglas J. Griffin. During the search for both men, the police found dead rabbits, all of them half-eaten and dismembered, every now and then along their search. Finally, they were to find Marcus dead by the Fairfax Station Bridge, now known as Bunnyman's Bridge. In his hand he held a man-made hammer-like knife tool, made with a sharp rock and a sturdy branch as a handle. They thought nothing of it, and didn't care how he died, only that he was apprehended, and they no longer had to worry about him. They had a name for Marcus, but later on they would realize they named the wrong person Bunnyman. Still searching for Douglas, they kept on finding dead half-eaten rabbits every so often while the search went on. Eventually they were to name Douglas the Bunnyman from then on. Months passed and the police gave up their search. Everybody assumed the Bunnyman was dead by now, if not gone, so they went on with their small-town lives. Come October, people started seeing dead bunnies reappearing out of the blue and starting to fear the unseen. Halloween night came around, and as usual, a bunch of kids had gone over to the bridge that night to drink and do whatever kids their age in the early 20th century did. Midnight came around within minutes, and most of the kids had left. Only 3 of them remained at the bridge. Exactly after midnight, a bright light came from the bridge, right where the kids were. A few seconds later, they were all dead, throats slashed with the same type of tool that was found next to the other escapee, Marcus. Not only were their throats slashed, but they were cut up and down their chests, gutted like fish. The Bunnyman then hung both of the boys from one end of the bridge with a rope around their necks, hanging them from the overpass with their legs dangling in view of any passing cars. The girl was hung the same way on the other side of the bridge. This happened on Halloween in 1905. After that, they didn't see or hear anything from him for another year. Halloween 1906 was approaching, and parents as well as the teens in Clifton still remember the incident that had occurred 1 year ago at the bridge, his bridge, the Bunnyman's Bridge. That night, 7 teens were left remaining right before midnight at the bridge. Thinking little of it, 6 remained inside the bridge, while one, Adrian Hatala, had remained a good distance from the bridge, hoping to have enough time to escape if the same thing happened again. She was the only one to witness this. A dim light walking the railroad track just before midnight stopping right above the bridge at midnight, then disappearing at the same time that a bright flash was inside the bridge. She heard the deafening sounds of terrified screaming coming from inside the bridge that lasted only seconds. Moments later, they were all hung from the edge of the bridge in the same way as the corpses a year earlier. Horrified, she ran home and refused to tell all of what she saw, just spattered words mixed with incoherent mumblings that the people of her town had to put together to come up with her story. No one understood it or believed her. They charged her with the teen's murders and locked her up in the asylum of Lorton. In 1913, the same thing happened, with 9 teenagers this time on a Halloween night once again. Adrienne was still locked up. They dropped her sentence, but it was too late. The insanity had finally conquered her. Even if she was released, she was too far gone to have a life, so she spent her remaining years in the asylum until she finally died in 1953 of reported shock. No one knows exactly what she died of shock from, but supposedly she had died in her sleep, dreaming of that one dreaded night. Perhaps the Bunny Man had finally gotten to her. More murders were to take place, however, although after the murders in 1913 most people stayed clear of the bridge on Halloween. 1943 rolls around and 6 teenagers go strolling out on Halloween night. A couple of hours later, all of them dead, same way as all of the others. Investigations took place, but as usual, nothing was discovered. 1976, the same situation occurs, this time with only 3 people. The only other incident that occurred since then was in 1987. A woman was enjoying the night with her 4 friends. Halloween night had finally come, and they had gone driving out to enjoy the night after invading the children's candy bags. They had settled around 11 p.m. at the bridge, waiting for midnight to come. They didn't believe in the myth, so they decided to see it for themselves, and were to be the only ones who actually withstood the Bunny Man. They had waited around an hour or so, and it was nearly midnight when Janet started getting a little scared. They had all been up pulling pranks on each other, jumping out of the bushes and screaming, so she was already a little worked up. Midnight hits, and by this stage she's in a total panic. She's almost out of the bridge when the lights get really bright outside. When that happens, her body is halfway outside the bridge. She sees her skin start tearing at the chest, but nothing is piercing her skin. She manages to finally leave the bridge. Completely horrified, she hits a hanging body and knocks herself out. When she awakens, she discovers that she has been bleeding. She was lucky that the cut had just started, and it wasn't very bad at all. She left and never returned to the bridge again. She has been seen sitting on a swinging bench on her balcony every morning, just staring in the direction towards the bridge a couple of miles down. From then on, the story remains untouched and unmoved.
I was driving on the highway from work one night, the usual boring route I take every night. I exited the highway and went straight to the gas station to put some gas. As I was pumping gas, a little store caught my attention. I've never seen it there before. I always come to this store, but the weird thing is, the building looked very old. When I was done, I got in the car and headed straight over to the store. In that moment, it felt like something was calling me, pulling me towards the building. I even heard a whisper, "I'll save you from your misery." But I couldn't turn away. I had to figure out what was inside. I parked the car, got out, closed the door, and stood there. I could feel incredible energy surrounding me. This place had power. Each step closer, the air felt thicker. I proceeded to go inside. The place had very dim lights, but I didn't have a chance to look around. I was being pulled to an area in the back. Something back there wanted my attention. I could hear it calling me. This way. To be honest, it was intoxicating. When I reached the back, I heard a voice say, "It's been waiting for you." As an old man walking towards me with one cane, I noticed he only had one eye. I asked him, "What are you talking about? What is this place?" He presented a mask to me and said, "Take it. It's yours. It always was. Before I could even say anything, he put it in my hands. Then instantly I was being pulled out of the building. And it felt like my mouth was glued shut. When I was finally out, the grip of what was pulling me released me. When I turned around to go back in to get some answers, it was gone. It disappeared, vanished, like if it was never there, and I hallucinated the whole thing. But I was still carrying the mask. It had a smiling face. For some reason, it was relaxing. I got in the car and headed home. I got to the house, put the mask on the bed, and took a shower. I couldn't stop thinking about the mask. I had the urge to put it on.
Put me on.
It was so inviting. After I got out, I went to my laptop to figure out at least something about the store. I wanted to know what the hell was going on. During the time I was opening my laptop, I heard,
"Pick me up."
Then in the corner of the room, I saw hands reaching at me, slowly getting closer and closer. I don't know why, but I wanted to reach out to them too. So I let it consume me.
"I'll save you from your misery."
It sounded so convincing. I was tired of my everyday life. I hated myself. I was alone. I closed my eyes, and it pulled me to the mask. I picked it up and it said,
"No more suffering."
As tears rolled down my face, I started to feel that same energy I felt outside that store. I took a deep breath, opened the bottom of the mask, and slowly put it on. Very quickly, it latched to my face, drilling through my skin. I attempted to take it off, but in the process, it was ripping my face off with tremendous pain. I pulled so hard, I heard my jaw crack. But eventually, I let the mask take over. It cracked my jaw back in place and drilled through my skull, causing me to ball up on the floor in a fetal position until the deed was done. As the blood dripped out of the mask, I felt complete for the first time in my life. Enormous power traveled in my body, such an exquisite feeling. The darkness is my home now. I no longer feel alone. After I collected myself, I stared into the mirror, looking at my new face. I began to hear more voices.
"I'll guide you.
It felt so warm and calm.
It'll all go away. I assure you, things will change."
I'm no longer part of society. The lies, the hatred, the never-ending everyday bullshit. Now, I creep the streets in the beautiful moonlight. I see everything. I hear everything. Creeping is a must. My new face was right. Things did change. Now, now I'm always smiling.
Chills went down my spine. I knew what I was doing was stupid, but the urge was too strong to resist. I pulled the covers over my head and focused. It'll be okay. I couldn't help but to remember the last time I did this. I almost made it. I was almost out of my body into the astral plane when I felt the cold touch of a blade to my neck. What was that? I had to find out. I slipped easily into meditation. I felt calm, collected, and relaxed. but there was this residual fear nagging at the back of my mind. I focused on leaving my body. I focused on pushing all my energy out of my body, and soon I saw the rope. It seemed easier than the first time. I opened my eyes and reached up to grab the dangling rope, but I couldn't quite reach. Damn it. I extended my arm to the longest extent it could, but I could only touch the tip. I shook my head, closed my eyes, and focused my energy, but I still couldn't reach. I opened my eyes, frustrated, and looked up. I snapped back into reality with a fear I'd never felt before. My body shook with pure fear. My chest felt heavy and empty, and tears ran down my face uncontrollably. The knife to my neck could never compare to the face smiling down at me, holding the rope just out of reach. All that night, I couldn't stop thinking about the man's face, his smile, the way his eyes sunk in with decay. But the one thing that I couldn't shake was his smile. It was like a bargain. He would throw the rope down, but only if I gave him my body to inhabit. He would stop my constant struggling with life, because I would be forever in the astral plane. I wouldn't have to grow up. I could stay a child forever. The next day, I stayed home from school. I was sick to my stomach. I was actually considering his offer. He said no words, but I knew what he was saying. I thought again about all the suffering I've gone through, all the pain of heartbreak and loneliness. I thought about the little girl who just wanted to feel the love and kindness of another human. I knew his offer was going to set me free. I knew he'd take this body, and my suffering would be his to take. I would go to him and tell him to throw down the rope. The fear that had driven me away had turned to anticipation to go back. When the sun had gone down and the wolves howled at the moon, I knew it was time. I shivered with happiness for the first time in a long time. I cleared my thoughts and slipped right into meditation. I meditated for what seemed like ages before I actually calmed down. I took a deep breath in and let it out slowly. I started to see the rope. It was blurry at first, but as I collected my nerves, it became clear. The rope was still out of reach. I hesitated a minute before I looked up to see his face, smiling even bigger than before. I was frightened once again, but I wasn't going back. This was the one thing I had made my mind up on. Slowly, he lowered the rope. Once the rope was in reach, I touched it slightly. It was cold and rough and fit easily into the palm of my hand. When it hit the ground next to my feet, my eyes widened. As I turned my head to see him standing next to me, my heart raced and my palms became sweaty. His features were almost non-existent. He was tall, but walked with a hunchback. His eyes were sunken in, and where eyes should be was just two black holes. His mouth was large, and he was still smiling. He grabbed my head and pulled me close, his claw-like hand digging into my knuckle, drawing a little blood. I shivered in pure fear. He cocked his head to the side and let out a laugh that echoed through my head. I tried to cower in fear, but he put a hand to my face and made me look at him. He let me go with a light push. My back hit the rope, and I quickly turned and climbed the rope as fast as I could. I could hear the echoes of his laughter behind me, but I didn't look back. When I reached the top, I couldn't believe my eyes. Everything was gray. This was nothing like I imagined. The happiness I felt quickly faded, and I realized I wasn't in the astral plane. I'd been a fool. I scrambled to go back down the rope, but when I looked back behind me, it was like the rope never existed. There was nothing but ash. As I looked around, I was overwhelmed with sadness. Everything was dead. I was in purgatory. Houses were falling apart and burning. The grass was just a black mess of ash. The people who had eyes were crying. Those without just sat on the sidewalk and looked at the ground. There was no color except for the orange glow of the embers from the burning buildings. I didn't want to move. I was so afraid to look at anything for too long. I couldn't believe what a fool I had been. Perhaps this was my punishment for taking my life for granted. I had only been in this hell for 5 minutes, but I could feel the draining of all my emotions except sadness. I couldn't move. It was like my body had been chained to the ground. I looked up to the gray sky and chuckled a little. Freedom from one suffering to another. I knew that one day I would be driven insane from feeling my body decay, and some unsuspecting soul would try to leave their body to travel to the astral plane. But before they could make it, it would be my sunken face they saw, tempting them to come here so I could once again resume the life I had lost.
I bought some clothes online, but they ended up not fitting, so I was planning on mailing them back to the company in the same box they came in. I printed the shipping label, taped the box shut, and left it on my desk for a few days, because I have a terrible habit of putting things off. A friend comes over, sees the package, and we talk about it. She and I were going out anyway, so I figured that would be a good time to take it to the post office to ship it back. She and I both go to the post office together, and we dropped it off. A few days later, the package is back on my desk, in the exact same position it had been in when my friends saw it for the first time. I called her and asked if I definitely dropped it off at the post office. She said yes, there wasn't any return to sender sticker or anything like that. Plus, I hadn't gone back to the post office to pick up any packages. It just appeared, and I had to mail it again. Super weird, kind of freaked me out for a couple days. When the package reappeared on my desk, this is a desk in my bedroom, inside my home. So even if the package had been returned, because of the original label being visible, which it wasn't, someone would have had to pick it up from the post office and deliver it to the inside of my bedroom.
I had an encounter with what I can only explain as the paranormal during the summer going into my final year of high school. Every weekend, our group of friends went over to our friend Mike's house. Mike's mom was pretty relaxed, didn't really keep an eye on us, and let us do whatever we wanted. So we would all tell our parents we were staying there, and be able to leave and do whatever we wanted all night long. We stayed in the basement, and could pretty much make as much noise as we pleased. The basement was unfinished, aside from a few couches and recliners that we slept on at night, as well as a TV. There was also a futon that doubled as Mike's bed. The main couch I usually slept on was pushed against the wall, and I could see the side of the staircase, meaning I could see who was coming down the stairs, and I could see behind it where an auxiliary sink was. You know, those old cement sinks that are in the basements of older houses. Anyways, so we get back from doing whatever it was that evening, and all settle down and get ready for bed. I take my usual spot on the couch, but that night I was especially restless. I heard Mike and our other friend start to breathe heavy as they fell asleep. I just rolled around for another hour, with any sort of sleep evading me. I eventually lay on my back and accept that I'm not going to get to sleep. As I lay there, staring at the ceiling, I notice something out of the corner of my eye. I turn my head over towards where the auxiliary sink is. Also, the only part of the basement that has any light. Just a single light bulb hanging from the sink. I immediately see a boy standing in front of the sink. He looks completely black and gray, like someone took a scene out of a black and white old TV show and put it there. The clothes he had on were like from the 1910s, or maybe even before. A white button-up collared shirt, suspender shorts that have thick straps, leather shoes, and a small, puffy hat. I stare at him, and I close my eyes, and then reopen them. He disappears. Needless to say, that didn't help me get to sleep any faster. It took me weeks to tell my friends about the incident, but once I did, no one thought I was too crazy, surprisingly. Mike took it very seriously as he slept down there, and his fears about those things. After this night, I never saw any occurrences like that again at Mike's. But Mike, on the other hand, started to witness things like these, and different aberrations very frequently, to the point where he could no longer sleep in the basement, and wouldn't go down without someone with him. We tried to find some history of the land it was on, but came up empty-handed. To this day, we have no idea what caused this, but it bothered Mike so much, he still refuses to talk about it.
I was around 6 years old when the story happened, and unfortunately nobody who was there seems to believe me whenever I relay this event to them. I had been volunteered by my dad to tag along and help move a friend of his into a new house. It was getting later in the evening, and we had brought a moving truck to begin offloading stuff into the new house. Of course, being 6 years old, I could only do so much, so I took a more supervisor role, running around and pestering my dad about which superhero was the coolest. My dad dismissed my loudmouth babbling and lifted a large box off the truck, asking me to move out of the way. I wandered a few steps around the side of the moving truck, looking toward the main road that ran along the side of the house. What I saw across the road, while not immediately threatening, became something I saw in my night terrors well into my early teens. No ghoul, no ghost, no demon, but a man. A man dressed in what seemed to be a business suit with a long overcoat reaching just below his knees. He had short, messy brown hair and stood under a streetlight in front of a large row of hedges stretching uninterrupted to each end of the main road. He stood completely still, hands in his pockets, and apparently staring at me. I can only guess this because I couldn't see his eyes. The light above him cast shadows down on his face, covering his eyes and obscuring his features. I stood frozen for what felt like an hour staring at this person. The moment passing only when my dad called my name, snapping me out of my terror-induced trance and sending me running back to the house. I ran to the truck and exclaimed to my dad that there's a man across the street. It took tugging at his shirt and pleading to convince him to join me. He led the way back around the other side of the truck to confront whoever scared his kid. He stormed over and saw nobody, no one, and nothing. The man was gone, like smoke in the wind. To this day, I can't figure out how he did it. There wasn't any cars or vehicles nearby, no space between the hedges to sneak through. He wasn't farther down the sidewalk. I couldn't understand where he'd gone. I tried desperately to explain to my dad, and later to my dad's friend, what had happened, but neither believed me. To this day, I still think about him, why he was there, and what was going through his head. With any luck, I'll never know.
I remember the day I gave birth to it. It was a rainy spring afternoon, and my mother dropped everything to meet me at the hospital. My mother was worried for me, telling me she had nightmares about my baby. I thought she just read too many magazines and got herself all worked up like she usually did, so I ignored her whining and complaining until I saw the creature myself. The labor pains were horrific, and it felt as if the beast was tearing its way out of me with its talon-like nails. It's strange how a creature's seemingly fragile-looking fingertips could do so much damage to my tender flesh. The doctors gave me something for the pain, but nothing could dull the sense of dread and shock that overwhelmed me when I looked into those beady, icy blue eyes. I knew the moment I held it up in the light, with the confusion and terror on all of our faces, that my life would be forever changed. It was smaller than I pictured one of those things. It had a small round head, light-colored fur that seemed to cover its entire body. Its hair got darker and richer as it grew. Don't get me started on the flesh tone. The ghastly pigment in the skin sent shivers down my spine on first sight. The skin was so pale and translucent. Every time I held it in my arms, I was afraid that my hands would go right through it. And it seemed so delicate, so soft to the touch. It would cut and bleed just like ours, but the blood was unlike our own. The color was all wrong. No blood should ever taste sullen, forbidden, and repulsive. The creature's evil could be tasted, even in the blood. It was an abomination. But I tried to love it. It was my own abomination. I went through the agonizing 49 hours of hellish labor to bring that blanched beast kicking and screaming into the world. I had to let it have a chance to live, even if the doctors and nurses insisted I kill it. They said the beast might turn on me someday, and they were right. But back then I had to try and give it a normal life. I had to see if it had a soul just like we did. Maybe it would learn to accept me, or even love me. You can't blame me for trying. Sometimes it did enchant me, even while it repulsed me. Perhaps it's because I was its mother, and the bond between us still existed even through our differences. We endured this life together. A bond between a mother and a child is the strongest bond one can experience. I tried to ignore the way its bones would protrude crudely out of its elbows when it bent its arms. The skin wouldn't rip or tear, just stretched strangely to offer more movement for the child. I did eventually name it. Since it seemed to be a he, I named him Daniel Joseph Egan. It was my father's name. My mother insisted I name my first child that, even though I really would have considered a different name. She complained afterward, though, saying she didn't want a devil spawn like my son to have her father's name, and that it was a curse to name him so. But she is a strange woman, and she didn't even see the love I had for Daniel. I knew if I just tried hard enough, I could make him a wonderful, loving boy, despite his hideous looks. All he needed was a chance to prove himself, something I was willing to give, even to something that looked like a demon. So I raised it. Him. I decided he deserved a chance at some sort of life. And sure, I didn't let him go outside and play most times, and yes, I shouldn't have locked him up in the attic for most of his life, but it was only because I was scared. What would you do if you had a demon spawn of your own? A child who was a threat to society? He was a glaring reminder that I had been cursed, that my womb was so filthy I had spewed forth a terror upon the world, and forever changed it by my mistake. So maybe I should have controlled my temper a little better, but I still loved him. I was still willing to try. It was all I could offer him. I never meant to hurt him. I knew that deep down. But he did horrible things, like the time I found him hiding in the attic, and with his strangely shaped teeth he tore flesh off a helpless little kitten. He was eating it, alive. The thing still twitched in his hands, its eyes staring listlessly and meowing weakly, begging to be put out of its torment. I was so freaked. I tore the thing away from him and grabbed him roughly by the collar. I flung him into a wall. I didn't know his kind could be so fragile. I heard his bones make a strange popping sound, and I had to take him to the hospital. It was embarrassing. I had to wrap him in as many blankets as I could, trying desperately to cover his face. I showed the doctor his face when he examined him, and he gasped. Everyone does that the first time they see him. I had to practically beg the doctor to fix Daniel's back. I did tell him what happened, since I felt terribly upset I hurt him so badly, but the doctor seemed to sympathize with my plight. When he was finished, he took me to one side and murmured, "Miss Egan, his wounds will heal, but I'm afraid I need to warn you about having such an abnormal child. What if he attacks you next? If he's eating kittens, for God's sake?" "He is my son," I said harshly. "He will stay with me. I will teach him to do better." I took Daniel home and locked myself in my room. I cried for several hours. It got worse when he was old enough for school. Kids tease, but when they see him, they will flee in terror. Having his skin tone, his bone structure, those icy eyes, would scare the living crap out of me. I didn't want to put him through that, or the other children. I got so frustrated with his short attention span and acting out, I tried to hire a private teacher for him. It went well for the first 3 weeks. Then one day I came home from work to find his teacher dead. She had been skinned, her heart ripped out and eaten. He stood with the leftover bits of her blood on his hands and face, looking at me like a cat caught with a mouse. I was hungry, Mom. She told me if I wanted to be normal, I had to eat things, like all you normal people do. So I ate her. I screamed. "That's not what she meant! Oh my God, Daniel, what were you thinking? You can't keep doing this. It's wrong." After seeing the poor woman's body there, I snapped. I beat him. I was so angry, so ashamed, I just flipped out, I guess. I am usually a patient woman, not one to hurt anyone, let alone my own son. But I beat him to a bloody pulp, and when I saw the blood seep from his wounds in that freakish color, I hit him one last time for causing me so much pain. I guess I hit him the last time because he was different. I didn't take him to a doctor this time. I did clean up his wounds, not saying a word to him. He was shaking the whole time, probably afraid I would strike him if he dared to breathe. It was despicable of me, I know. I feel my heart becoming colder to him as time went on. I guess in the end, it's just what broke me, the jaded feeling of hopelessness. You try to make do with what you have, hoping someday it would become a beautiful butterfly somehow. You think love, time, and care will cultivate something no one ever thought possible. But in the end, when you realize it's fruitless, and you look back at it, realizing it's just a monster, you know that there's nothing you can do to change things. You know you need to put it out of its misery. Yours. Daniel did try so hard to be like us. He tried to dress like us. He tried to eat like us. He tried to learn our language and mannerisms as if it is one of his own, which is why this made it so much worse, just like they all told me it would. He was now a person, not a thing. I gave him an identity, which made it worse when I killed him. The guilt in my heart still weighs heavily on my soul. But I did do it. I waited till he was asleep, and I crept soundlessly up the stairs to the attic. Carrying a butcher knife in one hand, I slowly opened his door and snuck up to his bedside. He was curled sweetly around his pillow, his dark fur reflecting in the moonlight perfectly. It nearly broke my heart, but I used all the willpower I could muster and brought that knife crashing down into his side. He opened his eyes and let out a small cry of pain, which became muffled after the repeated strikes filled his lungs with blood. His hands reached out for me, begging me to stop, touching the side of my nightdress. I screamed the whole time, partly in agony, partly to drown out his muffled, pain-filled moans. I could feel myself start breathing again after I did it. It felt like the world had finally stopped spinning, and he lay there, like a dead angel, perfectly quiet and covered in rich, dark blood. That strange, dark blood he always seemed to have pumping through his veins. The last thing I remember doing afterwards was calling my mother. I did it. My mother sighed and said simply, "Good. I was wondering when you would. Wasn't messy." Yes, blood everywhere. It's so red, Mother. So red. My voice began to shake now. I was still holding the blood-soaked knife, all the while seeing his face as I told my mother the story. Yes, mortal blood tends to be red. That's why we usually bleed them first before slaughtering. I'm sorry you got attached to it. It's a hard thing to deal with. After all, they are supposed to be food. Do you want me to get the rest of the family? We really should eat them together, you know. I know. I guess that would be best. I'll let you handle that, okay? Okay, dear. I'll be over soon. Try to relax and put the deed out of your mind. After I hung up the phone, I went to the washroom to clean the blood up. It was all over my clothes, my black skin, my claws. I finished wiping the blood off and looked up at my reflection. Daniel tried so hard to be like us, but he was mortal. A small spot of blood got on one of my horns and I grabbed a cloth to wipe it off. Well, I better change, I thought to myself. I'll be having dinner guests soon.
To understand Lolli Cakez, you must first understand 𝐞𝐞 the clown. 𝐞𝐞 has not yet told her story. Lolli will do that. Lolli will have to remember. The mask that Lolli wears was 𝐞𝐞's. From what we know so far, 𝐞𝐞 was not good at anything. She was not beautiful. She could not make people laugh. She could not do tricks. She could not catch the eye of anyone. She was under everyone's radar. She was a whisper. When 𝐞𝐞 was at her best, she created these masks so that she could be beautiful, so that people would look at her and not see the ugliness and not see the scars. They would not see a clown who should be beautiful. They would only see the mask, and she could look from underneath. They wanted to come close. They took her flowers. They smiled, some of them uncertain. You could see their fear of clowns when they came close. 𝐞𝐞 sometimes fed on that fear. It is often wondered if the demons that control Lolli remember who 𝐞𝐞 was, if they remember any of the pain, if they remember any of the suffering. It is evident that she gains some of 𝐞𝐞's self-confidence when she puts the mask on, when she looks at people and they do not see the demons, they do not see the ugly, they do not see the monster underneath. Lolli knows she is a monster, but unlike 𝐞𝐞, she does not lament. She is not sad. She does not want to make them smile. Lolli Cakez remembers all of the pain. Lolli Cakez wants to see them shriek and shrink away in fear. She roams. in the bushes, in the garden, planning her next playdate. She looks at her masks when she's alone, pondering which mask should she show to the world? Which mask will scare them less so that they come forward? Which mask makes her feel like she can do everything a queen needs to do? We all wear masks. Every single one of us masks something. We wake up. We look in the mirror. We go outside. We talk to people. We answer questions all day long. When somebody asks you, "How are you?" do you stop? Do you pause? Do you hide behind your mask? Lolli loves being behind the mask. Lolli loves not being the vulnerable one, not allowing them to see the places she's been hurt, not allowing anyone to know what spot is vulnerable for her. Lolli will wear these masks. Lolli will remember Kiki, and their story will be told. March 16th, 2020, Lolli Cakez will pull out the storybook, and she will let everyone know who Kiki was. She will tell them all. She feels loyalty to Kiki the Clown, even though she doesn't want to remember any of the pain and suffering. She wants them to remember who Kiki was. She wants them to look into her eyes through the mask. She wants to give them flowers, and she wants to make them suffer.
Us. There are a lot of us on the bus. They always do it to us. When out on the street and no place to sleep, we can get lost on the bus. See there the old woman, her face painted red, telling her invisible friend every word that they said. You'd never know that the eyes in back of her head are watching you, waiting, wishing dead. The bus is just for us. It was on the bus where we first met. My eyes met you at once, made you my pet. And we'd never thought that we would forget that the bus is just for us. Down the aisle lurks the pimple-faced fat boy, playing with his little handheld video game toy. He sits all alone, no girl to call his own, but on lonely old nights his faithful right hand brings him joy. The bus was always there for us. If not for the shade that was in the aisle, I would have never seen you a smile. And I would have never walked that mile if the bus wasn't there for us. The bus we ride on has an iron stargate and a tentacle-tiled floor, solid concrete windows and a wooden screen door. In the back of the bus is a lemonade stand, and the driver only goes as fast as he can. He holds his eyelids up with a rubber band, while the tip of his tongue burns and he don't give a damn. He sits by himself and he sings, "Go, man, go." And he still doesn't know he's not driving a van. So if you ever want to get lost on the bus, come and join us. There are many strange things you may find. If not for the little old lady who talks to herself, little Game Boy Blue who probably wets himself, the driver who is obviously disheveled, I'd probably forget I'm not losing my mind. So don't stop for me on a rainy day. Don't bother to cause a fuss. If you know me, don't honk and say, hey, because it's not in you I trust. Lo, there are few that thought that they knew that the bus is just a bus. They never knew that the sky was not blue. And that there are a lot of us on the bus.
That thing in my house, I hate it with all my being. I want it gone, gone from my sight so that I may have a clear mind, a sound mind, a sane mind. But oh, the things I could do to it. The things I want to do to it. Oh, what a pleasure that would be. No! I must contain myself. I mustn't think like that. I mustn't. But if I did, would I be caught? Would the authorities come to my door? Would they lock me up for good? But what if I wasn't caught? What if I did get away with it? It would be gone. For good this time. But is it worth the risk? It is. It is! But how? How would I get away with it? I would have to kill it, of course. But the body. Where would I hide the body? Should I bury it in the backyard? No, too obvious. Maybe I could bury it somewhere else. But where? Where could I bury the body so that no one would find it? No, you fool! I mustn't bury it. Someone would find it. They'd know that I did it. I know they would. But what can I do? I must think of something, but what? I can't hide it in the house. I can't dispose of it in the garbage. Surely they would find it there. What to do? I wonder. No, that's disgusting. I can't eat it. Or could I? People have done it before. No, it's much too big. I can't possibly eat something that big by myself. But maybe I don't have to. Would you like to come to dinner?
Hi, my name is John. I'm self-employed graphic designer and, well, something pretty weird has been happening lately. I feel I need to keep track of it, and so I'm going to write everything down as it happens, so please be patient if this is tough to read. I'm keeping this as a log, but I'll only upload if it's worth anything. April 2nd. I've been twitching a ton lately, just small movements like a finger pressing the wrong key on my keyboard or slashing lines through my drawing pad. Stuff like that. Nothing huge, but well, it's getting noticeably worse. April 5th. The twitching is still there, and now it's turned into whole tremors that sometimes send jolts that run up my arms, and well, I'm probably going to go see a doctor soon. April 7th. Doctor says I may be hypoglycemic and to come back later for more testing. April 11th. The tremors are gone and everything seems alright. Updated my doctor and he says just be careful and keep an eye out while driving and operating machinery. April 15th. The tremors are back. Kind of not, but like, it's almost like I lost control of my left hand for a short period of time. It just nudged itself. Just to be safe, I'm going back to the doctor's ASAP. April 16th. Doctor definitely seems puzzled when I explain the situation to him. He told me to go see a psychologist because this is unlike anything he's seen before, but he's read a few studies on something called alien hand syndrome. And that seems to be pretty on the nose, but he wants me to speak to an expert. April 17th. My hand is definitely moving on its own. I did some reading on what the doctor said, and it seems like this could be it. After reading up on it and finding a few studies, I found that people who have this syndrome or disorder or whichever you want to call it, their hands actually have independent personalities. Not really sure how to put it, but when asked questions, they write out their own answers. So I'm going to try my own little test. A thing happened while I was setting up for the test and doing my nightly routine. First, I should explain what I'm doing. I planned to put a notebook and a pencil on my nightstand and hope that my hand would try to communicate with me. Man, what is happening in my life? I'm trying to talk to my hand. But anyways, I was making dinner. It was just a burger, and when I was getting ready to slice some onion to put on my burger, my hand just slid itself off the counter. I guess it doesn't like onions. Not sure how, because it doesn't taste, but I guess I can live without onion. It also really didn't want to let go of the pen when I tried to put it down. Anyways, I'm going to bed and hoping there will be something on the notebook. April 18th. Well, the test worked. I woke up to a scrawled out hello onto a nearly torn in half sheet of paper on my bed. Not exactly what I was expecting, but it does seem kind of underwhelming. But anyways, I'm scheduling an appointment with that psychologist today. Hopefully she can help me out. I've got the appointment set up for early tomorrow. Thankfully, because this is starting to creep me out, my left hand is starting to move more to the point that I'm struggling to type out this log without Lefty. Yeah, I figured I'd give it a nickname. Playing with something on my desk or doing something else. It's like having another person with me all the time. April 19th. Nothing on the notebook tonight. Maybe it wanted me to respond? I think I'll just write down a few basic questions to it. I mean, I wouldn't be able to hold a one-sided conversation either, so I guess I can't expect my sentient hand to. I think I'll see what Dr. Lang, my psychologist, thinks what questions I should ask it, or if I should at all. Dr. Lang was very friendly, but I'll be referring to her as Doc for ease of typing on my part, which has become obviously more difficult lately. She expressed a surprising amount of interest in my case. Well, I guess surprising to me. But the real weird thing for me is that she expressed worry for both me and my hand. I guess it makes sense if my hand has its own consciousness. I asked her about the questions, as she told me that the hands that are included in cases like mine can usually hear and understand what are happening around them, but, well, they're just around for the ride. At which point my hand just made an up and down motion. I'm assuming a nod of agreeance. She told me just ask some questions like I'm getting to know someone, which isn't too far off, I guess. April 20th. I asked the hand a few questions, like I met someone new, with a few personal curiosities, but set up a laptop on the nightstand after it tore through a few sheets of paper after writing hi. Here are the questions and coordinating answers. Be warned, they are kind of creepy. What's your name? Lefty, I guess. Although I've always liked the name Bruce. Do you have favorite things, like color, movie, or food? Yes, I do. I'm also a person, believe it or not. Don't like onions? No. I can taste everything you can. Hate that shit. Have you always been around, and if so, why show up now? I've always been here, just haven't been strong enough to do anything. You want to keep seeing the doc? Or can we work this out? Keep seeing her. I like her. How can you tell what's going on? Not sure you'd understand, but it's like I have my own little room. I've seen other questions, but to think I've had this whole other personality in my head for, well, my whole life is such a bizarre feeling. They know everything about me, but I know nothing about them other than 6 short questions that I could barely think of. Anyways, I'm making another appointment with the doc as per the request of Bruce. April 21st. Bruce has thankfully calmed down after last night. Maybe me acknowledging that he's real helped him calm down just a bit. I'm about to head over to Doc's. Hopefully she can give me some more insight into this issue. The doc seemed really impressed with me for trying to communicate with Bruce. She wanted me to try the same thing, so I sat down with a pen and paper, and although I warned her he might destroy it, to my surprise, Bruce did perfectly fine. So why did he destroy my notebook then? Oh well. Doc asked Bruce a bunch of questions that I can't recall, but when she was done, I tried to look at them and he pulled them away from my other hand and threw them at the doc. She looked at them and then over at me and told me that Bruce doesn't want me to see certain answers, but, well, that kind of weirded me out. But I guess everyone has a right to privacy, I guess. Bruce was comfortable telling me these things, though. He wanted me to talk to him more. We worked out a question system of 1 tap meaning yes and 2 taps meaning no. Not to pleasure myself with him, which is fair. Trust him with more movement so he can stay around longer. And that he felt helpless. I'm starting to feel bad for Bruce. I set up a weekly schedule with the doc on the way home, and I let Bruce take the wheel on the way home, too. One of the more scarier things that I've done, but it's progress. April 25th. Things are going well. Bruce is a cool guy, and we've even set up a schedule between ourselves of when to make sure he can come out safely and take control of the hand. Not where I thought it was going, but I'm happy that it's going well. May 3rd. Alright, 4th session with the doc was really weird. She was happy we were getting everything figured out, but wanted to do some testing. She wanted to see how it was Bruce was in my head, so she wanted me to submit to some hypnotic therapy. I said, sure, what's the harm, right? Well, I don't know what happened, but when I came to, she had a look in her eyes. I can only relate when I used to go to those haunted houses. It's like she was in flight or fight response. Bruce won't talk to me now, and it's strange. He's still coming out when it's his time, but he's not answering any of my questions anymore. And I got a text from the doc when Bruce was sleeping, telling me to be careful? What happened when I was out? I want to know. May 15th. Bruce hasn't talked much since that appointment. Just a little rabble here and there, but the one thing that has really gotten my attention is that he really didn't want to see the doc anymore. I need to figure out what happened. Bruce has been agitated lately. It's almost like there's an energy coming from my body that's foreign. May 30th. Bruce can now move my whole arm. It's unsettling, but there's not much that I can do about it. Doc isn't returning my text. Guess I'm not finding out what happened. June 2nd. I don't know what's going on, and I don't like it, but Bruce isn't keeping to the schedule, and he almost crashed the car into a bus. I had to pull the emergency brake. I think he's getting my legs. I figured out, though, that he sleeps. I can feel it when he does, and I need to fix this right now. June 10th. I finally got a hold of the doc, even though I could tell she didn't want to speak to me, but she did fill me in on what happened. She told me that when she tried to hypnotize me, she thought the body would be in a neutral state and me and Bruce could both speak. But Bruce took control over my body like it was his, and the doc said she got some bad vibes. Her curiosity got the better of her and she evaluated him. He was off. Doc told me I need to take full control back. I'm done with dates. This is it. Bruce heard the phone call, and next thing I knew, I couldn't move my body anymore. Bruce could. I was stuck watching what I was doing through the pane glass of my own mind. Bruce is fucked in the head, and I know what he wants. He never was content with coexisting with me. He wanted to live. He wanted full control, and he manipulated me into getting it, and I had to watch. Through every reflection that he looked into, every window, and the ponds, and into the eyes of the doc when he was carving the skin off of her. He killed her because she was the only other person who knew about him. He's looking for a quick transition to my life. He even tried deleting this, but I guess he forgot Control Z works on Reddit. I'm scared. I barely got control back, but I feel that horrible aura coming back. I'm uploading this so everyone knows what happened wasn't me. I can't control Bruce anymore, and I don't intend on letting him do this anymore. I'm going into a psych ward, and I'm telling them to lock me up. And I need to hurry. Edit. Everything's fine now. Got it all worked out. No need to worry about Bruce anymore. Just keep scrolling and have a wonderful life. Oh, and feel free to PM me if you want to do an AMA. I'd be more than happy to meet you.
For the majority of my adult life, I had been alone. I was quite introverted, so I wanted it to be that way. I had the same routine of waking up, showering, and eating a quick slice of bland toast before making the commute to my lackluster 9-to-5 job. My weekends were spent alone as well, usually at home reading or browsing the internet. I didn't have the desire to go out to bars and parties, let alone communicate with the few friends I had. That was all until I met Ellie. Ironically, we met at a party. One of the few friends that I did have insisted that I show up to this, and claimed it would be fun. I reluctantly agreed, and soon found myself at a party that I wish I never would have gone to. I played the role of the typical wallflower, hiding in the corner with a plastic cup in my hand. I'd never particularly had a taste for alcohol, but everyone was insisting that I have a drink and relax a little. Whatever. I thought I'd be standing alone in the corner all night, but I was surprised as a very attractive-looking girl made her way over to me. I was wondering why in the hell someone who I presumed to actually have a life wanted to come mingle with me. Her eyes were a piercing, frosty blue, made to stand out by her dark eyeshadow and blood-red lips. Her outfit showed a lot of pale skin, with jet black hair tumbling down her back. I had no words as she simply plucked the plastic cup from my hands and took a long swig, swiping her tongue over her full lips before discarding the cup. "What's your name, honey?" she asked in a seductive, almost rasp of a voice. She casually leaned up against the wall, twirling her hair around a long, pale finger. I told her my name was Sarah, and that's how it all started. We talked for hours as the guests began to thin out or just simply pass out. She told me that her name was Ellie, and wrote her phone number down for me on my arm before flouncing away through the remaining guests. I was glad to end up with a pretty girl's number, but I had no idea how long it would take for the permanent marker ink to wash from my forearm. Over the next few months, Ellie and I began to build a relationship. She helped me emerge from my shell, and I became a person that I never thought I could. We frequented bars and clubs, and she was an absolutely amazing chef. We were a few months into the relationship when it dawned on me that I'd never actually been to Ellie's house before. She always came to my place, and only vaguely talked about where she lived. I decided to bring up the topic, to which she simply stated that she didn't know I wanted to come over to her place. I thought it was a bit odd, but we made plans for me to come over the next weekend. It makes my stomach churn just thinking about it now. When she first unlocked the door and led me inside, my nostrils were hit with an odd smell. It wasn't any sort of food or something rotten, but it was just odd. She had me sit down on the sofa as she started cooking dinner. Her apartment was clean, but my eyes focused on a large garbage bag leaned against the wall. Upon closer inspection, the odd smell seemed to be coming from that bag. Before I could move any further, Ellie abruptly entered the room, making me jump. She briefly went wide-eyed before making her way over to me. "Tomorrow is garbage day. I just haven't gotten around to putting it out in the bin," she said, a hint of nervousness creeping into her voice. I just simply nodded my head and let the idea slip from my mind as we ate dinner and the night gloriously slipped by. I went home probably feeling the happiest I've ever been, dreaming about the next time I would get to see her. If only I knew what was in store for me. The second time I entered Ellie's apartment was a week later. It was the same as last time, except I could no longer smell that strange odor. The garbage bag was gone too, and I simply figured she'd taken it out to the trash before I'd come over. We were having a lovely evening, before Ellie realized that she'd left her phone at work. She told me to sit tight while she drove back and got it. Not long after she left was when shit really hit the fan. I was seated on the couch, enjoying a glass of wine. the whole apartment was quiet, until a sudden, loud thud nearly made me jump out of my skin. I just shrugged it off as someone else in the apartment next door, until I heard it again and again. It sounded like it was coming from the bedroom, which I had only briefly seen. I decided to investigate, which I now know was a big mistake. I opened the door to the bedroom and was hit by that strange odor again. But this time, it was a whole lot stronger than when I'd last smelled it. I surveyed the room, looking for anything out of place. I spotted a small black piece of plastic poking out from underneath the bed. I crouched down to my knees and decided to try pulling at it. I began to tug at the plastic, but it was surprisingly heavy. I pulled as hard as I could until there was a bulky, large garbage bag sitting in front of me. The strange odor filled the entire room now, and it was nauseating. Before I could do anything else, the bag began to move. I quickly jumped to my feet as fear began to course through my body. I stared in horror as the bag continued moving, and Lord knows what could have prepared me for what happened next. The bag suddenly ripped open, and I was greeted by the face of what I thought to be a man. His hair was scraggly and matted to his face in filthy clumps. His eyes were dull and seemed to have no life in them, while his lips were cracked and dry as a sign of major dehydration. I watched in horror as he began to slowly crawl out of the bag, revealing an emaciated body covered in bruises. His feet were missing, which I later figured out had been cut off to prevent him escaping the hell he was in. He slowly crawled towards me, heavily grunting like a diseased animal. I turned away and vomited, too disgusted at what I'd seen. I backed away, painstakingly, inches at a time, as my body was stiff with fear. To my absolute horror, the thing scrambled forward and began lapping the vomit up greedily. I let out a horrified shriek before running for my life towards the front door. I nearly ran into Ellie, who had a shocked, confused grin on her face. I shoved my way past her and fled from that wretched place. I never talked to Ellie again, and isolated myself from social interaction for a long time. I was too afraid to date again, thinking that I would come face to face with more grotesque horrors. I still have nightmares to this very day about what I saw in that bedroom. I'm always afraid that some creature will come crawling from underneath my bed to attack me. But the thing that haunts me most is that if I had just stuck around a few minutes more, I would have ended up just like that man in the bag.